What up, fam? Welcome back to Entrepreneur Hour Podcast and Entrepreneur Hour TV, where we create superhuman entrepreneurs. Let's go ahead and get into it. We've got some potentially controversial, maybe is the right word, topics that we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to go ahead and preface it by saying this. I've seen a lot of creators catch a lot of heat for talking about their personal beliefs or talking about some of their opinions that aren't business related. And so I understand that you're here, you listen to my show, you watch my channel specifically for content regarding your business. But here's the deal, guys. This is a moment in time in history with everything that's going on that we need to have these discussions. And I'm a human being. I have thoughts, I have feelings, I have opinions as well. So does my guest. And if we're not having these discussions, we're really missing out, right? So I understand if you're upset. I totally expect comments below to just thrash a lot of what we're both saying today. And that's okay, right? That's part of the conversation. If you want to unsubscribe, I'm not going to stop you. Do your thing. It is what it is. But I would be remiss if I didn't do this. I can't just skip things in the world. I can't just do nothing. I can't. It's just not in me. If you watched the other day, I had an episode where I talked a lot about empathy and how that's lacking in this conversation. That I just don't see it happening on either side, right? And I hate that we have sides, as we're going to talk about today, right? So I'm going to welcome my guest to the show, Mr. Sterling Brown, a guy I've gone way back with. At one point, we were actually even neighbors for several years. Went to middle school, high school with, know very, very well. Sterling, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and so part of what we want to talk about, obviously, are the issues. And the reason you specifically, come on, I feel like is we've been back and forth for years at this point. I think going back 4 or 5 years, talking about world issues. And I could see kind of you connecting the dots, putting your own, kind of formulating your thoughts, putting things together. And now you've launched this new endeavor, Essential News Discussion, where you're basically setting yourself up as a media company, right? So I don't know the full plan, the full trajectory. That's what we're going to talk about. And we're going to get into that. But first, I want to give you the mic and kind of give you the floor. And obviously, at the time of recording this, there's riots and protests all over the place. Every single state in the country has it going on. And as a black male yourself, I want to give you the floor to kind of speak to what's going on, the current climate, current events. What are some of your thoughts?
Oh, perfect. I thank you for having the floor. I'm going to try not to cover too much ground. But yes, I started Essential News Discussion. And the reason why I started it is because I posted on my personal Facebook page what ended up being a more controversial video than I realized. We won't get into the specifics of the video, but it was in regards to the coronavirus. Mm-hmm. And so the commentary on there was a lot more than what I was expecting. It initially was very pro and for, but then once one person said something contrary to it, and everybody had good points, there wasn't anything in there that I found offensive, but I just realized, okay, this is actually good, stimulating conversation. And the nice part was that because it was my personal page, a lot of the conversation was still civil. So what I've noticed in looking at strangers interacting is that the conversation tends to go uncivil very quickly. Yeah. So what I'm trying to do is take all the content that's already readily available from both sides, as you pointed, all sources that essentially have already been deemed relevant. So the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, CNN, Fox News, anything in the middle to the far left, to the far right. If the content seems to be somewhat reasonable, it's nice to share it in an environment with maybe a little comment or opinion from myself as the Essential News Discussion moderator. And then right now, everybody has some sort of a friend-to-friend connection. So there hasn't been any advertising for the Facebook page spent. And the plan is to just kind of grow it organically for a little bit while we work out exactly what it is. And the website is under construction. So we've expanded into something that I like talking about personally with the sports page. So we have the Essential Sports Talk as our sports section, and then we're just looking to grow it further from there. So everything else, if you were to go to the website, essentialnewsdiscussion.com, you'll see that it has a long way to go, but it has come a pretty good amount in a short time, as this has all come about over the last just a hair over 30 days.
Yeah. Oh, timely on your part.
Yeah.
So let's talk. A couple years ago, I think it was 2016, 2017, Had a gentleman come on the show, and I think it was around the time, actually, last election cycle, when there were some issues, brutality issues, a lot of racial tension, stuff like that going on in the world. Um, and I remember hearing stories and things that I've talked about before on the show that I wasn't aware of, right? So for example, the one story that I kind of sticks with me is that young Black men are educated by their parents that when you're driving, it's a whole new set of rules and things that, truth be told, my parents put behind the wheel and said, don't get pulled over, don't speed, don't do this. And that was the end of that discussion, right? So what I'm trying to unearth, because I think, I mentioned before my previous video talking about empathy. I think empathy requires understanding, right? It requires listening, observing, and getting to know what someone else's reality looks like. So to the best of your ability, are there any notable examples or things that have come up that have presented immediate challenges for you, or things that we would not be aware of, we being people like myself, that Caucasian folks that just wouldn't understand what's that like? What are some of the challenges that you yourself have experienced as a result of being who you are?
Absolutely. So my parents definitely did a great job in raising me. I'm not giving myself credit that I'm giving them the credit, because they were aware of a lot of situations I was going to run into that I would not have been prepared for on my own. So one of those things is getting pulled over, and I have been pulled over a handful of times. Fortunately, they've all gone well for me, and I think I give credit to them because I knew that when I pulled over, window all the way down, both hands on the steering wheel in plain sight after I've gotten my license and registration and insurance card, which are always nearby. And then music off, car off, and you wait and yes sir, no sir, or yes ma'am, no ma'am. And my parents didn't raise me to say yes sir, no sir, or ma'am at home. Just as long as I was respectful, they were fine.
Sure.
But they said when you get pulled over, now is the time to go ahead and introduce that extra element of being formal. So fortunately for me, that's led to, the worst case scenario being getting a ticket or a citation, whatever the cause may be. And the closest I had was just a misunderstanding, but the police officer pulled me over when I was 17 or 18, my senior year of high school. My dad had helped me get my first vehicle, and it was a car from the auction because he had his dealer license.
Mm.
And the Jeep Cherokee that I had actually had a license plate that was registered to a minivan. So a police officer pulled up behind me and ran the plate and just thought, the worst case scenario, maybe this is a stolen vehicle,
Right.
or does this guy look like someone else that we're looking for? And on the approach to the vehicle, after he turned on the sirens and pulled me over, I noticed he had his hand over his gun, which was still holstered, fortunately, as he kind of looked in the side view mirror to try to identify me beforehand. And fortunately, that was as far as it went because I did not fit the description of someone at that time, and the yes sir, no sir, I think worked in my favor. So I can see where this can escalate quickly. I've never been a police officer, but if I was in his shoes and I'm worried about approaching someone who may have had the courage, or not courage from a positive sense, but the audacity to steal a car and may be a criminal, then they're going to be thinking worst case scenario. So it's a very unique and unfortunate set of circumstances that led to George Floyd's death, and then a lot of other murder. That's the correct word for it. But I'm not trying to charge
No, sure.
anybody or anything, but a lot of those situations are they need to be addressed in a lot of different ways. So
What was it like? And I'm thinking about your specific situation. We were talking before we started recording, and where we went to school, predominantly white. The neighborhood that you and I lived in, predominantly white. What kind of challenges did that provide? Did you ever feel like people looked at you differently because of that, or was that ever a real issue? I know you mentioned several that I'll let you share.
yeah, absolutely. So growing up predominantly around white people, growing up predominantly around Black people, it's going to influence the way that you are. So you do tend to gravitate because there are other Black people that were friends, but it just didn't. Being an activist for my own cause and Black Lives Matter, I didn't take the interest in it as early as most people would have, because I didn't see the big picture. I was very fortunate. The white people around me were great. You and your family being one of them, and the school experience that I had outside of some jokes about not being black enough, or you're not really black, and attempts at humor, really at stereotypes and everything. They do make sense. Sometimes they hurt, but really it just kind of toughens you up and thickens your skin. But all of those factors really over the long run, because the thing about jokes is that there's almost always a little bit of truth to them, and that's why they sting. So if that continues to be the case throughout your upbringing into your young adulthood, and then you see it later, the ability to pull together is weakened by that. And it would be much better if we could have less division and more unity, which is a very contrived thing, just a platitude, if you will. But we do it by being divided. It just increases these negative forces that are preventing us from moving forward. Like right now, there is just too much division. There's too many things that we're arguing about, when in reality, there's way more in common amongst all of us, all different colors, sexes, everything, than there are differences. But unfortunately, we always are harping on those differences. And of course, race tends to be a part of that, both between black and white, within the black community, and then within other communities as well.
Yeah. I remember just before we moved to Austin, we still lived in Atlanta, and we frequented Buckhead Church. Andy Stanley, his whole one of his satellite churches there. And again, this was 2016, so it was again, pretty tense year. And he had these two gentlemen. I don't recall exactly. They were involved with some organization in Atlanta that was socially driven, civil rights, etc. And something they said that really stuck with me. I think you kind of just touched on it. And by the way, I'm going to provide some commentary. I told you beforehand, I never heard anybody make those gestures towards you about, black, whatever, because you don't talk or dress black, right? Quote unquote. Right. And I have heard that, some of my best friends, Jason, Vaughn's been on the show. I've literally heard, people, both black and white, make those comments to them directly. And it was said in a way that was demeaning. It wasn't like, yeah, joking. It was like, you are lesser of a black person because you don't act, dress, whatever, black, as though that is supposed to embody some kind of, right? Like, it's ridiculous. Like, how do you act a color, right? Like, there's all different types of variables of people, variances of people that act different ways, whether their background is what it is. You don't meet a white person that talks, that's an intellect, versus somebody, that works in the farm or whatever, and like past that same, you're not white because, I'm saying, like, it's just this weird thing. I don't know where that derived from. It's just really bizarre. So I had a huge issue with that then, and I do now. But one of the things that was interesting about back to what I was saying about these civil rights activists, or these, whatever it was they're involved with, something they said that really stuck with me, man, was they were talking about how black people are still, to a degree, as a group, segregation wasn't that long ago. Like, in the context of history, it wasn't that long ago. And so he's like, we're still trying to figure out, like, who we are, where we fit, what we're gonna be. And so he was like, we're still fit. Like, you guys have had this huge head start, right, so to speak, right? You guys are established in this and that. Like, we're still kind of figuring that out, was his point. Would you agree with that point? And what can we do to kind of help that process, so to speak, if that even is the right way to put it?
Yeah, that was actually a perfect question to something I had forgotten to say that fits right in with that. I said before, I never really took black activism probably the way that I should have, not really identifying myself as much of the black person that I am. And what that was it was a result of white people making the joke, oh, you're not really black. Black people saying the same thing, oh, you're not really black. Those same people that made those comments, the hurtful comments, but, at other times they put their arm around me. They would be supportive in different ways. But what those comments do is they tend to bring you down. What black activism does now, as I've thought about it a lot more in recent days than in before, is it kind of helps build you up. So as long as that Black activism
Yeah.
is very positive in bringing people together, I mean, a white person saying to a Black person, "You're not really Black," and it's a double put down, because a lot of times white people are viewing Black people as being less, and then they say you're not even that, so you're less than less. It's a pretty offensive thing to do as a joke, but these little things over time, they do tear you down. And supporting Black owned business is something that I'm actually become very proud of and fond of. So I'm trying to research and gather more information so that way I can help. So the website I'm doing, I'm Black, so I'm getting the ability to do that, and I'm putting a focus on reaching out to other, Black people, and see if we can all work together and grow our businesses, because growing our businesses is the best way to help out our family. Helping out our family is, the first thing before you help out friends. And then, Black people tend to be more friends, and their friends tend to be Black. So that's a great way to help the community, while also helping the economy. So that's been a new focus of mine.
Yeah.
I think supporting Black business is, obviously it's going to help myself, but it's going to help the economy. And then the only other thing I'll reference on that finally, because I think there's such a similarity now between Black activism and supporting Black business, that there was a 538 study about the economy, and it was meant to bring up the positive. Like, we've had unemployment growth for so long that we've added jobs now, which is taking the unemployment number down a little bit. However, they did point out that, within the African American community, we've had increased unemployment still. So we're widening the gap between the Black community and then all of the others. So it wasn't just white, we have Asian community,
Yeah.
Hispanic, so on and so forth. But that kind of stuck to me. I was like, wow, so this really could help. So if we're able to find a way to truly promote Black businesses, it'll help offset, because a lot of the people that I've seen, like business owners that have had their businesses rioted, I mean, nail salons, barber shops, sports bar, I've seen 3 different people, and they're all Black.
Yeah.
And that's not, I know protesters and rioters are 2 different people entirely, but it's very unfortunate that Black owned businesses are being affected disproportionately, it seems, because the stories that I see are Black business owners. So we have to try to turn that around as best we can.
Yeah, and hopefully let's get to a point where these riots and protests are not necessary, because we've rectified the issues.
It's brought a lot of attention to it. I will say that. I mean,
yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's the power of protesting, right? Like,
Right.
like that. I mean, I said it the other day in my video. I'm like, look, go back and look at what this country was founded upon, right? It was, we're not going to do this, and we are going to literally go out and throw your stuff in the water, right? Like Boston Tea Party.
Yeah.
I mean, like the whole reason this country exists the way it is because of actions just like that, right? So I have no issue whatsoever with standing behind something that you believe in. So anyways, and I mentioned the other day, and I want to kind of start getting into this now, is talking about, you mentioned before you posted a video about coronavirus. I know which one specifically you're talking about, because I saw some of the backlash that you received for that. but here's my issue with it, Sterling, is that we've seemed like we've arrived at a place in this country where there's no discussion outside of the narrative. There's no, if there's any kind of evidence that arises, it's not, hey, let's look at this, right? And I've been really kind of wrapping my mind around how I'm going to categorize myself or classify myself, if that's even necessary. I don't like the term conspiracy theorist, because I think it implies that you have a theory, right? That I know what's happening. And truth be told, I have no idea. So I've gone with Socratic methodologist is my new label for myself. And the reason being is that with anything, right, with any situation, I think there needs to be open conversation for this came up, right? We live in this world where information is just coming in all directions. We need to be able to assess it and have real conversation. And the problem is, what I see is that those people are being demonized for that, for just wanting to present conversation, not dissimilar to the video that you posted. Let's talk about this, not let's slam this and find everything we can to dispute not only you, but the information that they were saying, right? So as you see it, how can we start? My kind of conclusion is that that's politically driven, right? That you take one side, I take the other side. Tribalism, we become so divided, right? That now it's my team's going to win or your team's going to win, and you're this or you're that, and there's no room for anything in between. So how do we have these conversations? How are you going to present having these conversations with the platform you're creating, where we can look at this evidence without it being so vitriol, without it being such a place of controversy where people are just not really getting anywhere, accomplishing things? Or are we accomplishing things even by arguing?
That's a great question. Let me get clarification on the term you said. Was it Socratic methodology?
Socratic methodologist is
Methodologist, man.
is what I'm labeling myself. Pretty
That's a
fancy,
very
right?
that's a very impressive term.
Thank
If
you.
I was going to try to simplify it, I was thinking about it because I thought that's what you said. I would just call that independent thinking, right? I
Sure.
mean, your name's much better for it than what that is, but it seems that independent thinking is being shunned. If you that's the beauty of what they came up with the label of conspiracy theorists. And when I say they, I'm not talking about the elite, or I'm not talking about this vague group of people. They are people that you see in the comment section that are just arguing the point of the narrative, as you said. So if their media source puts out a story and you disagree with that story and you provide something to the contrary, they will try to rein you back in with more information from the same group of media sources. So independent thinking should be encouraged. And you're right, we kind of had some higher level conversations a while ago, and I don't want to get us off base by bringing up when that was or what that was regarding, which is why we don't talk about what the video is specifically. But let's talk about the topic of the video, which was the coronavirus. And at that point, it had been about 30 days worth of data where a lot of people had been both quarantined, and there was a little bit of data available to be analyzed. And there was a non-consistent thought to the quarantine, and it stemmed from different places locking down at different periods of time. But the initial plan of flattening the curve had clearly been achieved to the point where a lot of hospitals had furloughed employees and everything. So once the initial objective had been achieved, yet nothing had been changed to get back to a sense of normalcy, that's when you kind of have to start questioning what was the real reason. That seems more logical than illogical, but for whatever reason, those terminologies are reversed. And I think you would agree with that thought process. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. And I think for me, it's where do we go, right? And that's a question I had for you later on. Is I think at this point, like the world has changed, right? We have technology that right at our fingertips. I think before you knew where to go to find out the information that you wanted, right? It's like I go to the news, I listen, and now we're exposed to all these potential different viewpoints or different facts, right? Like some things are coming out, and here's the deal. I think it's a beautiful thing. And honestly, let me validate that point. Do you think that what is his name? Ahmaud Arbery? Is that his name?
Yeah, Arbery.
Okay.
Arbery.
Arbery. Those guys, those two gentlemen that murdered him, literally, so far as I
Wrong
understand
term,
it,
not
they were
gentleman.
not arrested until after the video was leaked. Correct?
Correct. Yeah, but not gentlemen.
No, they're not gentlemen.
Yeah.
Those cops, right? I don't recall their
Former
names.
cops.
Former cops were not arrested until the video surfaced. Correct?
Correct. Yes.
So here's the deal. The technology has allowed social accountability, right? Things that are now, people that say this, like, man, the world seems so tense. I'm like, no. I think the problem is that the world was this way. We're just seeing it now, right? It's being highlighted, it's being magnified in a way that it wasn't before, but it doesn't mean that this shit wasn't happening, because it absolutely was. So I think we're really struggling with what do we do with this information? So I think it's creating, I have cognitive bandwidth, right? only have so much that I can take in, and I want to kind of fit in my lane and like feel comfortable and go home and like feel at peace and feel like I'm in control and feel like it's a scary place to accept the fear that there might be other things out there that are happening that kind of challenge my notions, kind of challenge the way that I saw the world, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a difficult process of us, like, I have to shun what Sterling posted, that video you posted, or anything you posted, challenges people to think, because it's so different and far removed from what I'd like the world to be. I think that's a huge part of it.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And to go back to your conspiracy theorist label that people would like to attribute when you think too far outside the box, um, our government is great. Our country is great. I don't want to come across non-patriotic, but there are times where the government has overstepped their reach. And the Tuskegee Airmen is one example.
Sure.
I listened to Joe Rogan's podcast, and he recently had an author of a book that talked about MK Ultra. And there's a lot of confirmed facts in there of government outreach that unfortunately resulted in man, it's so a touchy subject, but MK Ultra was in regard to I guess the Manson family and tests that were being done by the government, and those tests involved illegal drugs,
Yeah.
and there's just some kind of there is a history of overreach within certain sectors of the government when there is not proper checks and balances. And my segue in that is to say the same thing exists with the police force. So,
Sure.
we unfortunately have to throw out solutions on our own. And I'm very happy that the NAACP put out a list of demands. And I think demands get your attention. But I think once people are being executed the way that we saw on camera, and the typical response is to not have a reaction, that would actually be scarier than the reaction we are having, because that's not normal. You should not have people that are there to protect and serve killing people in the street. So there does need to be a extreme reaction to an extreme action. So my proposed solution in that is this checks and balances that we have is supposed to be internal affairs, I believe, but internal affairs still falls under the jurisdiction of the police. So maybe they're going to move internal affairs to a federal agency, either within one that exists or create a new federal agency. And they just need to have some more checks and balances, so that way you can't just have police officers looking to other police officers for adequate discipline, because the backing is always going to be on the side of the police officers, even in the most egregious of situations like we saw. And you mentioned with Ahmaud Arbery, the video was from February 23rd. And it wasn't until we were still in lockdown. So I want to say that was in early May, if I'm not mistaken, that the
Yeah.
video kind of became
Yeah.
public and everything.
It was way longer than it should have been, for sure.
Exactly. And people had seen that video that decided that, yeah, what these two non-gentlemen did was allowable until we figured out what to do next, and that's not acceptable. So the peaceful protests, the non-rioting and looting is working, and it is very unfortunate that there is rioting and looting. And hopefully we can get into some of the causes behind that, because that and within itself is being deemed right versus left as far as who's responsible for that.
Yeah. I think that's my biggest problem with what I see going on. And I think that's a perfect segue, because I pledged to myself, I don't know when, but years ago. And I think it was a specific moment in time, and maybe you feel the same way, maybe you don't. Feel free to challenge me. But I remember I was watching a State of the Union address, and I remember I thought it was so ridiculous that you literally have both parties sitting on either side. And no matter, like, I could literally, right? Let's say I'm on one side, or let's say I'm on the left, right? I'm a Democrat, right? And let's say I say something that is like so profound. We're going to change the world. We're going to heal. We're going to find a cure for cancer. Well, the Republicans won't stand up and clap because that person's a Democrat, right?
Yes.
And there's, I think the part of it you said that's really important is independent thinking. I think the problem is that our system was created the way that it was in an age where I talked about information, right? It was necessary to know what these people stood on, what were their principles, what was their foundation, because I don't have the ability to get online, right, to know everything about everybody to who I'm voting for. So, hey, I need to know, great, I usually stand with conservative values. I'm voting Republican. I usually stand with progressive values. I'm going to vote right. And same, and you could really take this down to electoral college too. And I'm not as sophisticated with this as, you know, other people are. So I'm sure there are arguments against what I'm saying. But fundamentally speaking, as I understand it, I see the ramifications and the consequences of the systems that we've created, right? I think it's very dangerous for us to look at people and say, this changed for me big time. Maybe it has for you. But when the minute that I married a Hispanic, my wife's from Puerto Rico, and she's not like Puerto Rican in America, she's from Puerto Rico. Immediately, people assumed I was a Democrat. Immediately, right? Most of my life, white dude, Christian, Republican, right? And it's just like so the problem is, man, when I see these issues happen, whether it's coronavirus, whether it's the current protests with George Floyd, with Ahmaud Arbery, whatever it is that's going on, the first thing I see, and this is, you know, I'm pragmatic to my core, right? Pragmatism is, you know, something that I live by, and I'm an entrepreneur. So that's what we do. We see problems, we fix problems. That's what we do. So sorry, that's who I am. I'm looking for solutions. I want to talk, what are we going to do so this doesn't happen again? Because here's the problem, man. This has been happening since as early as I can remember, right? Well, Rodney King was what, 92? I mean, yeah. You know, and I know it goes, but I was born in 86. That was the first major one that I remember. How is this still a problem? Because we're not having these conversations from a pragmatic standpoint. Solutions. I had yet to hear, until you told me that, I'd yet to really hear somebody say, what are we going to do about this so this doesn't happen again? It's immediately blame the right, blame the left, blame this, blame that, blame this group, blame that group. And I'm like, guys, this is, we can't just do the thoughts and prayers thing. We can't just say thoughts and prayers, everything's going to be fine, blame this, blame that. And then 4 years later, we got the same damn problem again, right? That's what I see. That's what I'm so frustrated with. And I can't help but think that largely it comes from these political constructs we've created. If you're on this team, you're on that team. And that's it. You pick a side and that's your side, and you can't agree with anything else other that's outside of those sides. What would you have to say to
that? You're right. We do need more solutions. And unfortunately, the people that propose solutions, like a legitimate proposal of a solution, they get attacked. And that is very detrimental to moving forward. It's so unfortunate to bring it back to a bigger picture, like they don't want us to do this, but it really seems that not we as a people, but real change is not wanted, and it's not wanted by those that control the change. So if that's senators, if that's congressmen and women, if that's the president, if it's whatever the person is, there needs to be a way to more transparently see the progression of these laws. And then we need to see the enforcement of these laws correctly. Because the biggest problem to me is we can write down the nicest thing in the world. Like, you know, literally it's like a homework assignment. You write down a 500-word essay of like, everybody should be nice to each other. Everybody gets a kitten or a puppy every Friday. Mm-hmm. But if you don't enforce what you write down, or it's enforced in a way where like, you know, it's going to be detrimental to the purpose, what was the point of even writing it, you know? So, and what I've noticed is a lot of times when you have pro Second Amendment rights, this is where people on the left tend to be anti-gun, is because the enforcement of the law for open carry, concealed carry, any of those laws, they tend to only work for white people. Mm. And they're used against Black people. Philando Castile is the person that was pulled over also in Minnesota, and he was explaining to the police officer that he had a concealed carry, and he was going to give him the papers that he wanted, and it was all caught on camera where he shot Philando Castile. So there is this inherent fear of Black and brown people that should not cause people to necessarily lose their lives. I mean, there has to be a process for de-escalation, and that does start with accountability. If I'm not mistaken, that police officer was, I can't remember. I know that the punishment did not fit what should be a crime. You shouldn't be able to kill somebody who's giving you the documents that you're pulling them over for to prove this, that, and the other. So to get back to your original question, people that propose solutions unfortunately get attacked. And not the conspiracy-minded aspect, but when you do seek truth and you reveal things that you're not supposed to, or you're too controversial, which we've talked about before
Sure.
with this, both today and before.
Mm.
The unfortunate part about these great people, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., John F. Kennedy, is they unfortunately were all killed. So there is a risk that goes along with being on the forefront of issues that as a society we're maybe not naturally ready to go there. Does that make sense? I mean, it's an extreme risk, but I think it's one that does exist.
Yeah. I was going to ask, when you were talking, I was thinking about examples. I think those are relevant examples, right? MLK, I think, is a good example. JFK is a good example. I'm going to be in trouble, man, because it seems like all these guys that have abbreviations, are the ones that have getting whacked. So I better be careful with my CMH thing here. Anyways, I don't know what it is about that, the truth seekers, that we are so alienated. And maybe it is just because it doesn't fit the narrative. I don't know, man. But I feel like that's part of this conversation that we need to have is, what are we going to do going forward? Because what we're doing, in my viewpoint, is not working, right? Like, clearly it's not working. And I don't know about you specifically, but I don't want to be relegated to, this is who I vote for. Like, to me, that's insulting. Like, I have a big, and I think it also blocks. I was thinking about, you go to a sporting event. I remember being younger, going to a Falcons game and watching people get in like a fight over a football game, right? And it's so silly. It's like, you're going to go to jail, and this is going to be with you like a record for a long time over a sporting event, right? And I think that, like, I see some of the arguments and some of the stuff that's happening. It's like, it derives, in my viewpoint, from this tribalism that we've created, right? So, what can we do, I guess, to start encouraging people as a society to share these truths without the repercussions? Is this just part of, is this the tragic hero that the people that speak truth are just always going to be the one that get axed? I mean, like, surely that can't be the case. Like, who do you know that's actively out there doing that, that's doing so in a way that's productive, that's actually moving us forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the tribalism aspect is perfect analogy. I was thinking of the word tribalism so much, and then you said it shortly after. So that's very interesting, because I mean, we hadn't. I don't remember either of us ever saying the word tribalism to one another in the years that we've known each other. So it was just interesting. I mean, I know we were headed in that direction, but that's exactly what it is. It's you versus them, or me versus them, us versus them, however
Right.
you want to word it. And unfortunately, in a two-party system, that's exactly what you have. It's the same when you go to the Falcons game and they're playing the Buccaneers. It's us versus them.
Exactly.
And whatever that fight was about, you easily identify your enemy because they're wearing a different uniform, a different color. And we've identified Democrats and Republicans with, typically Democrats wear blue, Republicans wear red, and the elephant and the donkey, and, all those
identical mascots, right? It's just.
And what would be interesting is, I don't know if this is helpful right now, because this could actually, I don't know, we're in a stalemate when it comes to progressing on agenda, whether it's right or left. But it almost feels like, let's bring in that third party. Maybe it is libertarianism, if that's the right, changing of the term, but
Sure.
Libertarian, bring in a third member to this group, and let's give them equal say, and let's try to divide these lines a little bit more, because people that are moderate, maybe that's a fourth group. I don't think that you can have a choice that, in my opinion, is very poor choice. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I'm not a fan of Joe Biden. And that's the choice coming up. So
and it's not much better than the one we had 4 years ago.
Correct. Exactly. Very, very similar situation. Third choice would be much appreciated by a lot of people. And if that third choice was also inadequate, at least now we have an additional choice. it really seems like it just really seems like we're stuck, and you have to get unstuck. And so sometimes when you're stuck in a situation, you just have to do something different, right? If you're stuck, you can't just stay there. I mean, what's going to change your position? Nothing. You have to squirm, you have to scream for help, you have to wiggle, you have to try something different than what you are currently, and we're still doing the same thing.
Yeah. I think in an ideal world, you would show up and you literally wouldn't know who is affiliated with what, right? You would have to be forced to, like, I'm going to vote on these people based off their ideas, based off of what it is that they present. And oftentimes I think the funny thing is, to kind of further, add on to the point that you were making, is I've seen where they go out in the street, maybe you've seen these videos too, and like they'll ask people, hey, so-and-so said this, or they'll just do a statement. They won't tell who it is. They'll say, what do you think about this statement? And
Yes.
and it'll say, I think they actually do tell them first. I think they'll say, like, Donald Trump said blah, 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 blah. And then they're like, oh, that's the worst. And then it was actually like a Hillary or Joe Biden that said it, right? Like they base their response purely off of who the person was and what party they're affiliated with. And then I think the problem is too, and people don't realize this, media companies, right? The news, it's not like, I'm not going to pull a Trump and say lamestream media and like throw all these accusations at him and stuff like that. But think about it as what it is. It's a business, right? And so your viewership equates to money for them, advertising dollars. So like if their ratings go down, people get canceled, people lose jobs, people go out of business, right? So they're vying for your eyeballs, literally, right? And so I don't think necessarily we have that perspective all the time of thinking, man, if I stop watching this, they don't have business anymore, right? So they have taken sides as well. And there are corporate entities that are behind these people, right? There's corporate entities that, I mean, if you look at, like, do you think that Washington Post, for example, just an example, trust me, there's many examples not dissimilar to this one. Do you think they're ever going to publish anything that says anything negative about Amazon?
No.
If Bezos owns Washington Post.
Right.
And then people will say, well, the corporations are bad. Well, here's the deal. Those corporations have ties. This is always my thing. Fundamentally, I make fun of people, and they're both the right and the left. It's they're always saying there's somebody that's evil, right? It's the corporations, from the left to the right perspective, and from the right to the left, it's, well, the government's bad. And I'm like, guys, it's the same people. Like, they're all in bed together. They're all like working deals with each other. Like, you look at people that have $100 million plus net worth that are public servants their entire lives. How do you think they got there? How do you think they have that kind of wealth established? Like, they're making deals together, right? So it's real. I think we've created this monster. And the problem that I see, Sterling, is that I see this pendulum swinging back and forth, back and forth. And every time it's swinging more extreme. And that's how you arrive at Donald Trump as the 45th president of the United States. That's how that happens. Now the question is going to be, what's going to be the left's response? Or hopefully, and so really test our system here, is we end up somewhere a little bit closer to center, right? Somebody's going to come in and say, oh my God, we need to go back to being moderate, because that's, like, we're done with this circus. We're done with all this craziness. Like, we need to get back to center. Hopefully that's what happens. Hopefully we course correct. But man, I just see so much danger in only watching one news network that it clearly has taken a side, right? Or only following certain politicians and what they have to say, and dismissing everybody else and blocking them and not following them. Like, I have really, by design, pushed myself to hear both sides of the discussion, right? Because I think that's prudent. I think that's where we need to be. We need to make them fight for our vote, make them fight for our viewership. You want me to watch Fox? Then you better start saying stuff with facts that I want to watch, not stuff that's just trying to pull me down to your narrative, right? And same for, whatever, NBC, whatever it is. So I just see it as such a huge issue, man. And I think if there's one gift that I could give to people, is to challenge them to start thinking independently and make them appease you with facts, logic, solid narratives, not this, I'm out for your vote, I'm out for your emotion based, I'm trying to scare you into things. Like, man, to me, as I see it, it's a pretty scary world that we're in right now with that.
Yes, you're right. With the viewing in, people tune in to cheer their team on. And it's like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Fox News caters to people that are fans of Trump. CNN tears them down. So when you turn on the TV to decide where you're going to go get your news source, unfortunately, some people are treating politics like their sports team.
Right.
Okay, am I rooting for the Buccaneers or the Falcons? Yeah. So I'm gonna tune into the Buck station where the commentators are for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they're talking about, oh, that was definitely a holding call on the Atlanta Falcons, and I can be like, yeah, they're right, the refs are cheating us. So now we can get upset at another group of people together as a community, and you're not going to get a fair viewing of the football game by watching a broadcast that is
Yeah.
promoted by one of the teams,
Yeah.
and it's
And you
just
think
a
about the sport example, that's so funny because you as a Falcons fan, I just exposed you as a Falcons fan.
yeah.
I think you already said that. But no matter what the Saints do, you're never going to have anything complimentary to say because you're a Falcons fan, right? And
Yeah,
here's the deal: even if they do something,
easier on himself and Saints fans either.
yeah. So even if they do something that is a great move, let's say they have a great draft or the good free agent acquisition or whatever, you're not going to applaud that. You're going to see it as a threat, which is going to further put
Yeah.
you into a state of fear, which is going to further entrench you in your roots with the Falcons, right? So which is only going to make you hate them even more, right? So, anyways, I know we're restating the same points, restating the obvious, but man, I think it's the perfect analogy. I think it's quite literally what's happening, and here's the issue that I see, anyways, is that nothing changes, right? We stay
Yeah.
static, right? That nothing actually happens. That it's and I think long term, if we continue that action, right? If we can or inaction, you know, um, I am concerned about where we end up socially, right? I think we've lost sight of the fact that we're on the same team. We've lost sight of the fact that we're all American, right? We're all a part of this country, and the focus needs to be on let's provide solutions to let's be better as a team. That's the team you play for. That's the team you're on, right? Not all this other nonsense, right? It just drives me crazy because I think Warren Buffett said it. He was talking about how um, if he were to sit down and fix all the world's problems or fix the country's problems, he could do it in 15 minutes, right? And I think what he was basically saying, effectively, is what we're talking about, right? There's so many bureaucratic nuances and other forces at play that prevent that from happening. And maybe people say that gridlock is a good thing because it prevents somebody from, if I think if anybody was questioning whether our system works or not, think about this: Donald Trump has nuclear codes and he hasn't used them. And I'm
Yeah,
not throwing anything at
that's
Trump.
really good. That's really good.
But you know what I'm saying? Like if there's more validity in the system, that the system actually that has been in place to really, checks and balances and this and that, just think about that for a second, right? Like we're still here. We have survived, you know. So anyways, man, I see it and I wish I wish as a whole we had more of an independent perspective. And I would think that would really pull us back to being on the same team. So you mentioned a couple of news sources I want to talk to you about. Because obviously you're pulling a lot and kind of curating, and you're doing your own stuff, which is good too, but you're curating a lot from different news sources and stuff like that. So what do you do? I talked about watching both channels and kind of, I think some people, it just ends up being conflicting. They don't know what to believe because you watch the same story and it sounds like it's two different stories. Where do you go to find relevant information that you find to be very credible? Excuse me.
Absolutely. That's a great question. So, what I did specifically for this was I furthered what I was already doing independently. So, independently, what I started to do was I relocated for a job from Florida to California for a little while. And I didn't know as much about California as I did because I was born in California, moved to Georgia, and was pretty much raised through high school in Georgia. That's where, we interacted and were friends and played basketball and everything else. But and going back to California to do some research. So what I did was I followed the local news stations out in the Los Angeles area, the Southern California area. I still followed the Florida, Orlando markets, and I followed Atlanta. I didn't follow New York per se at that time, but I also followed CNN and Fox News. And actually, I'll be honest, I did not follow Fox News at the time. I've kind of skewed more towards the right in my posts, but I also don't like being identified as Republican or Democrat. I would much prefer to look at the issue by itself.
Yeah.
Just because you're on one side on one issue does not mean you should go
Oh,
completely column. So
totally.
yes. And so I wasn't on Fox News and on the right side of a lot of source of my information. But over time I realized I need that side for balance. I need to see a article that's on the same topic and how CNN covers it versus Fox News covering it. And what I've been able to identify, and I'll toot my own horn a little bit, is I feel like when I read information, I'm able to pull out the sentences and the comments and
Mm,
thoughts that are truly valuable and not opinion based or not designed to incite a feeling or emotion. Because when we get this feeling or emotion, then we start making less rational decisions. So for Essential News Discussion, when I decided I was going to do that here about a month ago, I went to CNN Politics, Fox News Business, Fox News, MSNBC, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, just a combination of those. And I kind of start my day to make sure I'm able to post something. And I kind of go through what is the most interesting to me, post that on the Essential News Discussion. Typically, I like to try to add a comment for context and see what kind of interaction that gets. And I think that's helped me grow in my understanding. And it's led to maybe some conspiracy theory like thinking. And that's only from the standpoint or labeling that people give it.
sure.
But I would call it independent thinking. And here's my final thought on that for conspiracy theory. I want to keep talking about other stuff, but if don't be afraid to leave it open ended, because whenever I start on, you know, they just want us locked in our homes for coronavirus, like they're trying to tank the economy, or they don't
Right.
care about this, that, and the other. They're like, oh, well, why do they want that? They try to force you to say something like, oh, they're trying to lock you in your
Right.
home
Right.
5G towers, and you didn't say anything about that. You're just acknowledging the honest truth, like they want us locked in our home.
Mm,
Maybe it's for our own safety, but anytime the government in the past has said they were doing something for the safety of a person, that typically wasn't the 100% truth.
sure.
So independently thinking, don't be afraid to leave a conspiracy theory open. You can't know what the end goal is for a group of powerful people, a powerful person. All you can do is identify what's going on. And so my favorite analogy was, if you're walking in an alley in New York City and somebody comes up with a gun and they're robbing you, they say, give me your wallet. You don't try to figure out, well, what are you going to do with it? No, you just have to identify the reality of the situation and take proper steps. If you're getting robbed and you feel like giving your wallet will keep you safe, give your wallet so that way you can stay safe. That's what's most important.
Yeah.
And you don't have to try to figure out that next step. And so independent thinking is good. And if you realize what's going around you doesn't make any sense, then you should start trying to alert people of that. And maybe you can bring people together so you can stop the thing that doesn't make sense and start doing things that make more sense.
Yeah. I'm telling you, man, you're more of a Socratic methodologist than you realize. Because,
once I
because
once I learn how to say that, I'll start adopting it.
yeah, because effectively that's kind of what you said. I think is really important to notate is we can't make. So this is where I think people will say that the conspiracy theories are dangerous, and I agree with this wholeheartedly. When you're Alex Jones and you tell people this is what they're doing, they're creating human animal hybrids. They are trafficking children and harvesting their. That's some pretty substantial claims that have some deep ramifications, right? Like that's
Right.
really dangerous to be saying stuff like that without evidence. I understand that part about conspiracy theory. The reason I'm trying to reframe that is because I feel like that term has been so bastardized at this point,
Yes.
conspiracy theorist, that I'm like, guys, this is not what I am. This is not what I stand for. What I want is I want to look at all sides of the issue, AKA Socratic method, right? And so I'm like, you leave it open. Let's talk about this. Not like you said, they want us inside because they're trying to implement 5G or whatever. Like that's something you can't validate. There's no way to
Right.
validate that. You have no idea. And if you could, you would be working in the Pentagon or doing something, what, you know what I'm
Exactly.
saying? Like
Yeah.
there's no way for us to know that, but we can't dismiss everybody. We can't have these extremes to say, this is conspiracy theory. It's like, no, no, no. I'm bringing up questions, but I think the presentation of those questions, the presentation of that discussion, we have to do a better job of, AKA my introduction of Socratic methodology. So let me ask you this. How do you remove your emotions? I think a lot of people, actually, we have one of our students, shout out to Paula. She we did something where we were trying to have people set goals, and basically I don't know that we said they needed to have like something you know, if they didn't achieve their goal, they had to have some kind of punishment, but they couldn't reward themselves with something. Well, she took it to punishment. So she didn't achieve her goal. So one of the punishments that she laid out for herself was that if she didn't do something that week or for every week thereafter, she would have to listen to like Rush Limbaugh or a conservative talking head. That was her punishment to herself. And, and it was so funny to me, but I thought to myself, I was like, man, that's where we are, right? And I'm not like putting her on blast, but that's where we are, is that it's painful in many ways for us to watch the other side's opinion, right? And so you said, I didn't used to watch Fox News, now I do. Have you just taken it purely from a perspective of like, I'm going to remove my emotions, I'm going to set that intention? How do you not get so entrenched, you know, to the point where you start feeling that anger towards one viewpoint or another based on how that information is presented? Is that something you had to go through?
That's a great question. Well, it's a weird thing to draw a connection to, but remember I referred earlier about being able to read information and pull out what I thought to be useful and what
Yeah.
was could be technically be deemed misinformation.
Yeah.
That actually started almost around the same time when I was doing daily fantasy sports, and had a pretty good success rate with that. But as I was gathering information, I was looking for a correlation between events. So let's keep the focus on the news side of things for now. And if we want to get into sports later, we can. But on the news side of things, I was reading information and something just didn't make sense. Like there was just a line in there it seemed like it was trying to guide you in between separate statements of fact. And it was like, statement of fact, you should feel this way, statement of fact. And I don't need that line in between. I just need the statements of fact. And, because I don't want to be insensitive, obviously. So that's why I'm leaving out the specifics of, that particular incident. And any time where life and death is involved, because this incident did involve life and death, you can't not answer question because you have that cop out and say, well, people died or a person.
Yeah, right.
But you need to be able to talk about the issue too. So
right.
You have an independent thought that is a good question that needs to be answered. And the answer to that question is, we can't answer that now because somebody died or people died.
Yeah.
That's not a fair answer, because
then you never have the discussion.
Let's think about it like this. People's lives are at risk and we can't talk about it.
Yeah, that's so stupid. Remember when Vegas happened, the Vegas shooting? I think you and I really connected on the Vegas shooting. I remember you messaging me.
To be honest, that's what I was referencing. Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I remember bringing up conversations about that, right? And like, what the hell was this, right? This makes no sense. And like these random videos that popped up of like, it looked like they were shooters at multiple locations and different sounds and stuff like that. It just didn't. Something was off, right? Something was really off. I'll go ahead and say it because whatever, we need to be specific about what we're talking about here. And I brought that up, and man, did people like, this is not the time. This is not. Now, again, my presentation was pretty bad, right? My presentation was, they're lying to us, right? And I made a definitive statement about what's going on, and I didn't have evidence to suggest that, just enough to have a conversation. So I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's a really, really good example.
Yes. You got to sometimes find unique elements in a story. And I can't even put into context the absurdity of, so one of the key aspects of that shooting was the security guard. Remember, that went through the door. And I think there's a correlation causation there between, like this guy could have continued shooting because he had more ammo to go through, but the security guard was so integral, right? And that security guard didn't give a press statement to CNN or Fox or through the Associated Press or any kind of established medium. The only person that got an interview with that security guard was Ellen.
What?
Ellen DeGeneres.
What?
And that it's laughable.
Know that.
Yeah. The only media outlet that he spoke to was through Ellen. And like the absurdity of that is so lost in this moment. And that was what, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, it was
4 years ago. So that's one of those things where this doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And there's
same with building tower number 7, 9/11, same thing. How does tower number 7 just collapse the way that it did? Like, that's ridiculous. Like, there's evidence I think I told you I had an example or a metaphor that I used. I said, look, I can see without science, I can see there's stars out there. I can see there's planet, there's something out there. I know something's there. I just don't know what it is, but I can see it with my own two eyes, right? Something's weird. Something's going on. Something exists, right? And I think that's absolutely, there were plenty of examples like that with the Vegas thing. I didn't mean to interrupt what you were saying. Sorry to interject or.
No, sorry. Yeah, I use that example because of its absurdity, but
Yeah.
there are equally absurd disconnects in the story about what happened. And there's just so many little tidbits of information. This could be a whole nother show talking about just the Vegas shooting, but there are so many things that get lost. And then you go back to 9/11 too. Like, there are statements of fact in there, but when you say that statement of fact, people will try their best to pull information out of you to get to. They're trying to get you to say jet fuel doesn't melt steel beams, or trying to get you to say it was an inside job, or trying to get you to say something along those lines. You just have to say, no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying let's say, like, this, something weird happened, and this is that weird thing. Can we acknowledge that? And if you brought up stars, no one's ever experienced a black hole, but Neil deGrasse Tyson tells us that black holes exist, and we just have to take his word on it. If you say black holes don't exist, there's actually merit behind that, because you can't. How do you prove that exists to the common person?
So he's a conspiracy theorist.
Exactly. He's a conspiracy theorist about these things in outer space that aren't really there.
Yeah. No, totally, man. Yeah. So something really interesting to note for a lot of people to think about here, and this has really helped me a lot. It was a book I was reading recently. I think it was Never Split the Difference. I think, don't quote me. But he was talking about, it's a book on negotiations. And he was talking about the different nuances of how the brain works, right? And I love brain science. I'm a huge brain science nerd. I actually have my Muse S sitting right here. It's my neurofeedback device. So I'm always like studying different things about the brain, how it works, how to build habits, whatever. So one of the things that he talks about is to be careful, because people, as you're telling something like you're just talking about, the brain always wants to finish the story loop, right? Like it's impossible to leave a story unended, right? And also too, think about it this way. So we have also developed ways that stories are told as well, right? So if you look at like the format of how people tell stories, like the brain gets accustomed to seeing stories play out the way that they're supposed to, right? So like Disney, basically you can interchange, I've talked about this before, you can interchange the characters, and it's basically the same format every single movie. It's why something like Game of Thrones, the last season, just flopped, because it broke the usual construct of what a story loop looks like. So not only are you not finishing the story loop when you do that, but it also falls out of alignment with what they deem to be what a story actually looks like and how it concludes, right? So from a brain science perspective, it's very challenging to people to have you say something and not provide or not continue down that lineage of thinking to say, World Trade Center building number 7 collapsed. I don't know why, right? Like, I don't know why, but it happened and it looks weird. Like, they want you to say, so what do you believe? That the government, that George Bush knew, that George Bush was involved? It's like, no. Like, I'm not saying any of that. I have no idea who was involved. Like, I don't have George on speed dial. Like, I have no idea, but I am saying that it looks weird. I am saying it looks
weird.
That's a great
point. I never thought of it like that. That's really well said. Because you're right. People do it, and now that's the reason why they do it. For the most part, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, and I can say something about the Pentagon, right? If you look at the pictures, like, okay, I've used this example before, but I don't think I have on my show. How in the world do we have what should be, and probably is, the most secured facility on planet Earth in the history of man? And the only footage we have is just this random fireball that just popped up. We have nothing else. We can't see an actual plane. We can't see anything else. Boeing actually came to the scene, and you can look this up. This is not this is not me theorizing. This is like actual evidence that arise from the situation. And to my understanding, they said these do not look like parts from an airplane, from one of our airplanes, right? Like, these are things that actually happened. There's a lot of really funky stuff that went on there. So again, you start saying those things, and now you're like, okay, so you're saying the government shot a missile at the Pentagon? Like, no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's just how is the Pentagon not have more footage than that? Like, that's just ridiculous to me. So I don't know. We have to get to a point where we can have these conversations where it doesn't arrive at nutso conspiracy, Alex Jones, they're turning the frogs gay conversation, right? Like that's not what I'm presenting. I just want to have a conversation, because here's the deal. Don't ask me to lower my intelligence, and don't insult my intelligence on TV, right?
Yep.
Like, don't get on and tell me this is your narrative. This is what it says. You have to accept it and like it, right? Like, I can tell, don't tell me something sweet when it's sour. Like, I can, like, I know there's something weird here, and I just can't accept that, right? I just can't. So from that standpoint, man, what I love is somebody like what you're doing to kind of bring things back full circle here. I love that you're pushing that narrative. You're pushing people. And I told you the other day, I think one of the biggest things we have to do in this country, and I was studying what Finland has done, their education system. Finland has taught people how to think, not what to think, right? I'm going to say it again. They've taught them how to think, not what to think. They went from the bottom of the ranks, their education system. They are up there in the top, right? Not the top, but somewhere in that discussion. And they have really focused on teaching people how to do what we're talking about, which is to be a critical thinker, independent thinker, so on and so forth. So here's the thing. We've talked about a lot, Sterling, and we've gotten way into the weeds, and I'm talking way more than I should have, because this is about you, not about me. But how do we start making that shift? Is it people doing like what you're doing, creating that conversation? How do we break through to people, challenge them? Is that already happening? What does that look like as you see it? How do we unravel or deconstruct what we've created?
That's a great question. My focus personally is how I can do everything in my power to help the economy. I feel like the economy, the US economy, is getting absolutely brutalized. And it stems from the precautions that were taken for coronavirus. And we had no idea how severe it was going to be. So I'm 100% for taking extreme measures to protect what they thought could be millions of people dead, especially
Sure.
Americans and everything in New York and densely populated areas. So my only problem is that once we had some data, even if it was just a little data, what we were doing was so extreme that it needed to have some corrective measures planned. And I'm not going to put the blame on Trump. I'm not going to put the blame on any one person. Collectively, Congress needed to pull us out of this since they put us in it. So the economy can't, there's no way for me to wrap my brain around the fact that in such a short window of time, 35 million Americans are unemployed, like became unemployed,
Right.
in addition to those that were already unemployed.
Right.
Now, I understand the quick ability to recover, but also during that time of unemployment, we lost so many businesses, traditional businesses, retail businesses, small businesses.
Yep.
There's no plan to replace those that we've lost.
Nope.
And it's also not fair, because we funded the payroll protection plan for small businesses. That amount wasn't arbitrary. That amount was decided upon. And then we quickly ran out of money for small businesses. And we had big businesses take money under the guise of keeping people employed, and then have to give that money back or decide to give that money back. And that's where I was directly affected. Was I saw what was going on with my employer, and they got some of that money and they gave it back. And the day that they gave it back, I got called to let me know I was being furloughed. I was in the group of people that was being furloughed. Wow. And no knock on them, but man, talk about an eye opener. And during me being furloughed, that's when I said, you know what? After the post I made, there's some opportunity here. And I've heard people say it on Joe Rogan Experience, which is I'm a big fan of listening to the podcast. There needs to be a more moderate midline news source. Yeah. And it is very difficult to be your own news source. So the best thing that I could come up with the time I had available was pulling information from other sources and then offering a brief tidbit, explanation, justification, confirmation on that information. So with that being said, I want to try to turn this into a business with more people to help me do things, promote Black businesses, promote business in general. I love the way that it is growing very slowly right now, intentionally, because it's my friends, family, friends of friends. And when you work like that, you're establishing a stronger connection at its core. So by the time you do start promoting, the contrived expression, we're all in this together, but now you can have more ties that make it a little bit more of an honest statement.
Yeah.
So if I was gonna, I feel like we're wrapping up, but I don't have any time obligations or restraint. I would love to talk more about the economy, because I can't be the only one to do that. There needs to be a lot of different people across the country figuring out what they can do, produce themselves. Could be content, could be a product, could be service. And then the other side is personal plug is when you go to essentialnewsdiscussion.com, you're going to start seeing me advertising what I'm also doing on my 9 to 5 job. I got into, roof repair, roof replacement. So you'll see, what my business is. I have some friends that I plan on reaching out to. A real good friend who I met in the car business, I'll say his name, Richard. Richard's with Keller Williams, and he's helping people sell their house, buy houses. And there's just these connections that need to be established amongst your own community, and then promote that out there, so that way we can spend money to people like that lost their business in the riots, that lost their business because of coronavirus and everything else.
Yeah, you say something, man, that I really want to highlight that I think is important, specifically for those that are listening that are kind of lost in all of this. I think the main thing to think about is what you're doing is empowerment. What you're doing is taking responsibility into your own hands and doing something about it, taking action. One of the things that I've seen that I really want to heavily warn people about is, in response to everything that's happening, is the whole mantra is get out and vote. That's not till November, right? And moreover, I think we've put too much emphasis on trusting one or a few select people to fix our problems. We can fix our own damn problems. Like, we are capable of creating the life that we want, to empower ourselves to do that. And that's exactly what you're doing. And so I told you then, and I'll tell you now, I commend you for seeing a problem in the world and going out and saying, I'm going to create a solution that's better, right? And I'm going to bring people together, and I'm going to create this ecosystem. And honestly, we've never had more potential. And I think that's the thing that's, we've talked about a lot of negative stuff. To me, that's the opportunity. We've never had more ability to connect, to find synergistic relationships between people and businesses and so on and so, to pull each other up, to support each other, to create a stronger ecosystem. And that's one of the biggest things. If you hear anybody talk about why Austin, Texas specifically is growing at the rate that it's growing, like 153 people move here every single day. Businesses are leaving California, coming here all the time. One of the biggest reasons people cite is cross-pollination. That's it. Like, that's the biggest difference, is people here are supporting each other. They're lifting each other up. They're finding ways to benefit each other. They're doing exactly what you're talking about, right? So I wanted to commend you for that and use you as an example, because I think we have put way too much faith in elected officials to fix the world's problems. And I think now we're seeing this fundamental shift where we can do those things ourselves. We can do way more than we ever thought that was possible. It's just a matter of taking action, and you've done so.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. You're absolutely right. When there is struggle and frustration, there's opportunity, and so I think that that word is perfect. It's an opportunistic time, and it doesn't feel like it. Instead of going out and voting between two less than desirable options for a lot of people, every day that you wake up and do something for yourself, start your own business, work for someone else that's starting their own business, just working in some way, shape, or form, you're voting for yourself. And it really doesn't matter who's in power at that point. The first Black president or Donald Trump, who doesn't have any political experience before. I mean, to be honest, those are both different levels of accomplishment, but it really doesn't matter who's president if you've built your own business from the ground up. And we've talked about Amazon being a powerhouse. That wasn't the case in the early 90s.
No.
They were selling books online. They were so out of the loop to what the internet would become that they were selling books online. And then now Jeff Bezos is set to possibly and probably be the world's first trillionaire. Yeah. So in 30 years, somebody is now possibly going to be the world's first trillionaire. That's it. And it started from somebody who just woke up every morning, voted for themselves by working hard on something.
Yeah, totally, man. And in technology has made that possible. I think that's the beautiful thing, is we've created an instrument, although it makes us very divided right now. I think now more than ever, there's so much beauty in that. I think it's really a powerful thing. So before I let you go, man, let's, so people, I know there's some call to actions here. People connect with you further to the discussion. Essentialnewsdiscussion.com. Is that the main place to go, or do you want them to follow you on Facebook, or where's the main place to connect with you and what you're doing?
That's a great question. So I've locked up the social media accounts that I want less, maybe one or two more at this time, but I haven't established channels of content for everything. So I am looking to grow. I've just reached out again to a few friends right now, and we're trying to iron out some details to where we can promote each other. At this point, there's no money exchanging hands between myself or anybody else. But the obvious goal of this is to get some money transitioning between parties. So I would love to get to a point where I could pay someone to be on staff. But for right now, we need to grow the business, work on fully monetizing the website. So it's a combination of ways that I monitor every day on how communication happens. So email is Sterling B at essentialnewsdiscussion.com. My phone number is listed on the website or on the Facebook page. But if you go to Essential News Discussion on Facebook, go ahead and like that, and you'll see some ways of reaching out. I do check the email daily, and just any way that you think that this can grow, we'll kind of consider different people and try to work to make this just a way to bring people together.
Cool, man. I love it. All right, guys, those links will all be included below. You can check that out. Make sure to support Sterling. Dude, thanks for taking now an hour and 15 minutes to hang out and talk about some of these issues. I didn't think we'd cover it all in this amount of time, and I'm sure we could talk for much longer. But I appreciate it. I think it was a refreshing conversation maybe for a lot of people.
Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate it. It was great talking to you again. And let me give you credit too, because thank you again for all your help behind the scenes, even before this point. We've been in communication now for a while, like you said, kind of rekindling a business or a friendship as well as the business relationship. So thank you.
Yeah, man. Sure thing. All right, buddy. Take care.